very, very warm welcome to all the panelists. And before we begin with the debate for the day, let me put up a question to the audience. How many of you feel that a landscape architect should lead a public realm project? Can we have a count? Can somebody just take a quick count? Madhup, can you help me? Not two hands, please. So, oh, okay. So let me repeat the question. How many of you think that the landscape architect should lead the projects in public realm? Ooh, suddenly more hands are up. Madhup, no cheating. You have to be unbiased. Okay. And how many of you feel that the urban designer or the urban designer should be the lead in a public realm project? Okay, so now we know we're going to take a poll post the end of this debate, and I can see Team Urban Design has a great road ahead. So, oh, I forgot to ask one more question before we begin the debate. Who do you think, apart from a landscape, does anybody think that apart from a landscape architect or an urban designer, there is another professional qualified enough to take the lead? Oh, there's one. There are two hands raised. Can I just know what professional are you talking about? Just the name of that field which you're talking about. Can somebody just pass her the mic, please? And the second hand raised behind.
Actually, a number of them, transportation planners, ecologists.
You think they can lead the...
Economists. Yeah, no, they need to be participants.
No, participants, yes. We are agreeing that it is a multidisciplinary team which is required. But who leads is the question.
Well, in the current situation, then an ecologist.
An ecologist? Okay. There was a hand raised behind. If you could introduce yourself also. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself, Shraddha.
Hi, my name is Priyanka Mathur. By profession, I'm a landscape architect. But I think an infrastructure planner can also lead this.
Lovely. So you think Okay. So before we begin the debate, there's a very one more question which I'll keep open to everybody. Has anybody applied for a project in public realm? And if you have, do you think the criteria specified or the requirements specified for a person to take, or lead a large-scale infrastructure or a riverfront development project are something which you agree to? So with this question, I'll keep it open to the audience also, and I'll ask since the team urban designers seem to be at disadvantage, I'll ask them to open the debate as to who do they think should lead the large-scale public realm projects or infrastructure projects. I am with you guys, though I'm a landscape architect, don't you worry.
Okay, first I think the landscape architect should not lead the projects. Okay, so that's my position. Now, who else can lead it? The point is the city. We're talking about, let's say I think I'll qualify this. There's a distinction between the projects that are in the very tight urban realm and the projects which are outside of it, right? Now, let's keep it to the space that's within the urban realm, right? Because otherwise it becomes obvious that in the place where the built space is not primary, then the architect or the urban designer may not have as big a role, right? So let's keep it to the place where it's about the city and the urban center. So in these places, what one has to understand is that there is a built space that is dominantly defines the cityscape. And if there is a project that, say, is a project that is about the streets or a urban realm, then it is the urban designer who is equipped with the toolkit and the sensibility to think about buildings and the open space between the buildings and articulate these methodologies and processes, set it and collaborate and lead the project.
Hello. Hi, Vijay. I would like to counter your point. Okay, so when you talk about public realm, and you talked about open spaces, and you talked about urban spaces. So you talked about open spaces and urban spaces. And there are so many other factors that are part of a public realm. So I'll have 3 points that I'll make on this. And I'll just highlight those points. So I'll just briefly first touch upon those points and then I'll highlight them. The first point is essentially the market reality of public realm projects. Right? And the second point that I'll make is the connectors, that are the connections which are there, and landscape architecture or landscape professionals as those connectors. And the third part that I'll finally finish my point is as the strength of a landscape architect, which helps us become the lead on these projects. So I'll basically touch upon these 3 points. Now, the first point that I would like to make is the market reality. The market reality essentially means that current landscape or large-scale public projects are not done by urban designers. They are not done by landscape architects. They are being led by architects. And when I say architects, it's not a derogatory, I don't mean a derogatory thing. But I definitely would say that there is a sense of understanding that a urban designer can place or a landscape architect can place. There is a sensibility that gets attached to the profession. However, when I say an architect, it's primarily because of a financial condition that has been imposed in the contract and which gets fulfilled when the architect comes into play. And then you have these players, then they can take up different people. So essentially the team leader doesn't have the sensibility that should be there when a large-scale public realm project happens. That's the first point. The second point is landscape architecture or landscape architecture professionals are connectors. We are essentially having, now this is, I may sound biased, but we essentially have an understanding of ecologies, and these are connected ecologies. It could be a social ecology of people who are living over there. It could be an ecology of the microorganisms that are there. It could be connecting these ecologies. It could be plant-related ecologies. So there are so many ecologies that would govern that kind of a project, and the person sitting right in the middle of it would be the team leader. And he needs to have that kind of a sensibility. She also. So, sorry, my mistake. So he or she, as a, it's a plural word. So he or she should have that kind of a sensibility to connect all of them to be able to achieve a good project. Now, the third point that I want to make is the strength of a landscape architect. The strength of a landscape architect is basically understanding not only about what is to be done on a macro level, but also understanding the details and the texture that needs to go along with it. So they can go into details and then they get that thing executed also, which means looking at it from macro level, they can go all the way down and talk about detailing of those areas. So these 3 points I would like to make a counter to your argument.
It's actually, I mean, I'm just thinking aloud as I speak. So, for example, being an urban designer, if you gave me a riverfront project, for example, so definitely there's a lot that an urban designer can contribute, because an urban designer basically understands how projects link to the nerve of the city, how it connects back to the city. And an urban designer is trained to not only look at one field, but sort of balance out and mix a lot of fields: engineering, planning, architecture, economics, finance. I'm sure even landscape architects are taught that. The scales may be a little different, but urban designers understand those qualities a little better. But even having said that, if you gave me a riverfront project, I would probably want a landscape architect to lead it, while maybe in the conceptual stage, the urban designer takes a lead, maybe for the first stage where you are putting the vision together. And then, when the detailing comes, because definitely the strength of ecology, hydrology is required. It's a dominant thing when it comes to that. But now if you take an urban park, for example, this is a debate I've had many times with landscape architects. But if you take an urban park, so what we find, or I have found, is that just like architects, often landscape architects tend to look at an urban park like a site for a building project. So they will put a boundary wall around the park, and then they will treat it like, make those golas and jogging tracks, and this is my domain and I'm going to make a nice park. It might be the best park on the planet, but it may be creating a barrier in the city. It may not be equitable. And often when I've had this discussion with landscape architects, so I've said, why don't you put a pathway to the park, through the park, because there's a market here and there's a metro station here, and if you don't put that pathway and that gate, the walking distance of that poor fellow who's taking the metro every day is going to increase by 5 times. So I've received very vehement, protests. And then I remember this lady, she told me, well, when you do your housing projects, we don't tell you to put a pathway through the housing project. But I disagreed with her, because through the housing projects that we design, my unit designs, I do put the pathway. And if you see the old, DDA housing projects like Mayur Vihar, all the DDA housing projects, they all have public streets going through the housing projects. So we do that, and it's very essential. Now, I'll give you one example, not dwell on it much, but the East Kidwai Nagar project. That colony was so wonderful. It had like around 15, 16 street networks, and everybody could walk from all the surrounding neighborhoods to reach the metro station or reach Delhi Hat or reach AIIMS. After this project has come up, it's a great project. I'm not criticizing it, central government. But after this project has come up, the pathways that went through the project are cut off. So that's a wrong approach to housing. There could be a wrong approach to landscape. There could be a right approach to landscape. That doesn't really demean any of the professions. But I have found this approach. So probably what I feel is, it's not about just lead, because there are different phases of a project where different people could lead the project. But I feel that in architectural education, we need to introduce urban design in first year. Because what I find, even when I go for crits into colleges, so I will find a site and that's it. And I'll be like, ये site अर्थ में है, प्लूटो में है, मार्स में है, कुछ नहीं पता उनका, आधा टाइम उनको खुद ही नहीं पता होता. So they don't know where the road is, where the frontage is, where the access is, where the streets are, how the site is fitting into the context. So urban design is not really a field that looks to be a lead, or it's not an aggressive profession. It's actually a very humble profession. It looks at respecting everything that's around you, so that the lives of the people around that project becomes better. It's actually a humble profession. That's why we don't fight, and that's why we lose out, I guess. So I guess I'll close my mouth.
Before somebody says, am I audible now? Yeah, okay. So before the opposition team replies, since you picked up the example of a riverfront project, which is, I think, a very, very, very spiced up project right now across the country, because we are having or bus. You know what? Even though this is a landscape pavilion, somehow you're getting the food first. you're getting a mic which kind of allows your voice to reach to the far end first. So I don't know what this is all about.
It's about minority pleasing.
Uh-huh. It's
Minority.
all about minority. Good one. Okay. Yeah, since you kind of mentioned the riverfront project, I was saying, and it's one of the most, I don't know what other word to use, but spiced up project in across the country, because we have a prototype getting developed, which unluckily for us is not led by, either an ecologist or a landscape architect. Or do you think that an urban designer is the right person to kind of take the first stand for a project like, because you mentioned that, for a project like river front development, because according to what you said, an urban designer would have that understanding of what the vibe of the city is. Similarly, I'd like to ask this panel that do you think that it is more important that the ecological approach to a project like a riverfront development would be better heard or better understood if a landscape architect takes, yeah.
Hi. So to answer to you, Devyani, I certainly think that landscape architects should take the lead, especially for projects which are driven with environment. So be it riverfront or be it coastal road, or be it even alignments of bridges and ceilings, and even the Nava Shiva link which is happening now in Mumbai. So each time there is an infrastructure development that goes through any eco-sensitive zone or any environmental sensitive zone, I think it makes sense that the landscape architects are actually brought on board on day one. We question the way the projects are aligned on the paper, because quite often we don't know how the lines are drawn. I mean, they're just drawn because we find them as the shortest route from point A to point B, but that shouldn't be the way it should be, especially when we're dealing with environmental and eco-sensitive zones, as I said. And I also strongly feel that landscape architects are in a huge position to understand and sort of contribute towards the mitigations that happen, or rather mitigations which have to be done after any kind of infrastructure development or any development for that matter. So I'm not necessarily looking at urban realm, like you mentioned, Vijay, about urban realm, but now from there on, if we were to go on to the scales above that, which is basically infrastructure, so all the highways and all the roadways and the networks which get done are essentially going through sensitive areas, and I think for mitigation purposes, landscape architects are the best fitted or the best suited, because they are the ones who can actually read an environmental assessment report, because quite often those reports are just kept. They are not meant to do anything, they're just technically there, and there isn't anybody who sort of sits down and tries to even say that these are the 5 things that we can do if at all we are given a chance. So from that perspective, I think it's important that landscape architects, or rather the nature of the project, should define who should lead the project.
Okay. I think we are getting into details of who should lead the projects. I will dial it down more to the young professionals sitting here who are maybe not sure what's happening to some extent, because most of them are young architects and they are, landscape architecture, urban design. So I'll share my experience when I was the young professional working on architecture projects. My boss gave me a book saying that, for this new project, we have to follow this guideline. They were urban design guidelines. Being a planner, urban designer by education, I understood it, but I didn't really see a professional book as such. And it started with the general introduction, and it introduced me to planning principles first. So this was a project where there was a lake, some housing was supposed to come up as a big large area, and the book talked about first the planning statistics, who will stay there, the densities, the regional context, economies, blah blah blah. So it was a planner's input over there. Then came the engineering part of it, the road infrastructure, the services, the amenities, civic amenities. So the engineering aspect was covered in that book. Third was the lake, the primary element of that area, and the streetscapes, street furniture, all the landscape elements were covered. Finally, the fourth part was there, which talked about the building design, the volumetric designs, how high, how tall, how long, finishing materials, so on and so forth, which was the architectural part. What I remembered was the fifth part, it was talking only about urban design principles. It combined all these things together and gave me a view, a section, a view, which was, talking about people, their quality of life, their way of life, how it would become if we combine all these four elements of engineering, planning, architecture, and landscape together. And what would that community look like? And this was some 18, 19 years ago, and today when I see that area, it actually looks like that. People are actually thriving in that community. So urban design is, I think, a confluence of all four of these, major professions. When I say engineering, it has civil engineering or MEP. When we talk about planning, it is not just economic planning, it has to do with ecology also, all those elements. So unless we have knowledge of all four equally, you may specialize into one of them. We are debating here about landscape architects. As Romi said, landscape architects tend to design within a site. Architects tend to design within a site. Landscape planners, let me complete. Landscape planners design beyond a site. I think what is missing is the planning aspect, which goes beyond the site boundaries. And once that happens, I think you've already become an urban designer. Sorry, you'll be coming on our side. Okay? So you will be coming on our side by breaking your boundaries. So for me, a city to be developed has to be looked at holistically, not architecturally, not landscape-wise, not planning or engineering-wise. It has to be looked from a built urban form together. And that's where I think urban designers sit in the center of all those four, bringing them together and leading them from front. That's what I feel.
Making my job as a moderator very tough. I'm trying to be unbiased. You have no idea right now after.
I want them to be on my side. Simple.
From Milind's argument, I would like to pick up 2 points which I strongly would be against. One is a human-centric approach, that we are designing for human communities to thrive. First of all, I think as landscape architects, we are trained to kind of broaden our user base. Humans are just a part of it, whereas for us, the users are not only humans, but we have those microorganisms, those birds, those any other flora and fauna as the user group. So we cannot only design for the comfort of human beings here. That is point one. Secondly, the fact that we limit ourselves to the site or boundary only, that's our entire, the entire profession is kind of trying to fight that the site boundary cannot define a site. We have to start at a regional level. And that's what we are thriving for, and that's what we are trying to put across through our work and through our voice. So I don't think I would agree with that at all.
So I suggest you call yourself landscape planners. That will be more accepting than landscape architects.
Sorry, just a small part in. I'll just say that it's landscape. This is the misconception that landscape architects are only designing within the set area, right? We are actually looking at the regional context and then designing for it. It's not planning for it, we are designing for it, right? So there's a difference, and this misconception is where we strongly disagree.
And regions are also defined with natural understanding only, so the definition of region is also equally important, because quite often it is kilometers radius is drawn on paper.
Again, the boundary put is again by a human, so it ultimately becomes human-centric.
This holier than thou.
I think I should give
this holier than thou, thing is not. See, actually speaking, I don't know. I'm just recalling this book I read 3-4 years ago. This Yuval Noah Hariri wala book, na. As soon as you put your axe to the your tools to the ground, you are no longer actually tampering with the ecology. Now, telling me that we are we are the ones who actually are the we take care of ecology much better than anybody else would be a little bit of a bias. No, let me complete. So I think I do acknowledge that the act of building, the idea of putting buildings on ground is worse than actually shaping the landscape. Fair enough. But given the fact that if I don't do that, someone else is going to do that, that's the reality, right? So I'd rather make sense of this whole idea, be more sensitive and deal with it myself than let someone much more destructive be allowed to do it. So this is the logic. So that said, I think I agree, there is no one amongst us here who is going to restrict ourselves to just a site. But that's not the norm. I'm sorry. That's not the norm. There are two things I've observed in working with landscape architects that I hold as dear friends and colleagues. One is that when we talk about design for a particular project, they want to work much more on the hardscape than the softscape. I'm sorry, but you may not be like that, but I have observed this. And we really pull them back, saying, boss, your job is not to make more architecture, you put less, we already put too much. You stop, tell us not to do more architecture, in fact you take away some of it. But I've seen this happen, and this may be more younger practitioners than older. As you get older, you realize that you really don't want to work on so much hardscape, you have to take it out. So this is one. The second thing is, there is a kind of, let's say, a collaborative attitude amongst landscape architects. There's not a leadership sense. I'll tell you why. There is a collaborative, which is actually much better. I'm not saying it's much better. They are sensitive.
Okay, should I hand Romi, you want to add something? Yeah, please. So before I think all of them are now pepped up because of 2-3 points he's raised. You might not get a chance later.
But
So
this is a little unrelated to this. Can
which
I
is
make the
fine.
point? Okay.
We can have another debate on that.
Okay. So actually, I want to take up on the point that you made about the ecology and the understanding. I think that is a very unique skill, and that is something that as a urban designer, I always try to learn from landscape architects, that how to understand the ecology of a place. And I would say that there's one more point I would like you all to think about. When people are doing even architecture projects, which is architecture is the primary project going around in the country right now. Well, most of the work is architecture. And lot of this architecture, most of it goes into environmental impact assessments, and this, this whole system is there. Right now, I'm a part of the EIA committee in Delhi, so I get to see all these projects. I feel that it's, what I'm a little worried about is that we are still in silos, that we have landscape architect tree dekhega, or pani dekhega, or ecology dekhega, urban designer connectivity dekhega, architect building dekhega. I think that every architect should be trained to understand the landscape ecology of a site. This is a basic thing. And what is happening right now is, architects, they take the site plan, design a building, then they say, oh, abhi ye clearance mil gaya, ab EIA chahiye, acha tree survey karao. At the EIA level, tree surveys, this is, I'll tell you, this is criminal. I think their license should be taken away. It is ridiculous. It makes me so angry, I can't tell you. So, first thing should be that you get a tree survey done. You understand the hydrology of a site. Understand the topography of a site, for God's sake, and they are subjecting their client to things like cutting one tree and planting 10. Why do you need to cut the tree in the first place? So in 99% of the projects that come for EIA, we actually tell them that if you had designed your building like this, you would have, instead of cutting 4,000 trees, you may have done it in 40 trees, or maybe not even that much. So this is also something that it needs to be mainstreamed. I think when we are always talking about this is the landscape architect's job, it's not the landscape architect's job. It's every designer's job. And everybody should know how to do it.
Can I add to this?
Sorry. let me, yes, what you're talking about, I completely agree with you, Romi. Sorry, completely agree with you, Romi. But these are built projects that you're talking about. Coming back to the public realm projects, I would like to counter.
Romi, you
Right,
managed
so-
to get a seat on that
So
side
sorry, I
of
was
the
so tempted to
team.
counter you at that time, but your first point was that you said, sorry, in my mind, I keep thinking about what you said, that we are all working in silos, that you're right. So we have to break those silos. Just that it stays in my mind. We are also always trying to work in tandem with other designers. And maybe we are not the best in ecology, but then ecologist is part of the team. It's about the sensibility, what you bring to the table, what that helps. And a team leader should be able to be sensible enough to understand that how a public infrastructure project needs to be dealt with. That's the part that I would like to make. Wimps, yes, we are not wimps. We are not wimps, by the way, but yes, we are very grounded. That is what I would say. And no, so we are very grounded is what I would say to that.
Better way of putting
And
it.
yes, being grounded would also mean that we are rooted to the ecologies. And I'll quote you on one very senior landscape architect whose book we always read in all the landscape colleges, talk about it. I'll just quote the name and you will understand. It's Ian McHugh, Designing with Nature. So when you talk about any large-scale project, yes, you're right that ecology, the moment you do a building on any site, you're destroying it. But then there is a way to do it. And that way is ingrained by the training of a landscape architect. And it's there in this, it's a similar training for an urban designer also, but the understanding of natural resources which are part of the terrain or part of that area is a little more to do with the landscape architecture than urban design is where I would come from.
I think both of you would.
I'm trying to beat them here. You can fight for them. So you talked about Ian McHugh, and we as urban designers have learned their books and those ideologies, everything. This is one problem that landscape architects are not understanding urban designers. We are on the same page actually. Only difference is we also look at the built form because we are also on the same page with the architects. So this is where, so when I as an urban designer, planner, architect, / we go on sites, I first see the topography, as she said. I look at the tree cover, I look at the ground cover, ecology. I map it on the plan, and then I see, okay, where can I build without disturbing things, so on and so forth. That's the urban designer in me, not the architect in me, looking at the site. Now, for me, I'm not a landscape architect, so I can't do that. So, but at least my sensibilities are enough developed through urban design to take care of all these aspects. Then I come to a specialist. That, Chittiz, please tell me what can I do here, because I know this is sensitive and I don't have the capability. So this is where I have to.
So one more point to this. Yes, you're right. You're looking at everything, but don't leave it at the policy level. Take it in detail and take it to the ground texture level. And that's why a landscape architect should be there. Yes, right, you're right. It's not the job of an urban designer. We completely understand your point that you are saying that we look at all these things, and which is why you are a very important part of the team. But you will have to take that level a little further, just like landscape architects do, and take it into detail. For example, when you talk about this, there is a macro level policy that has to be generated and has to be taken to the level where it is the part of the texture or the ambience of that place, which is what a landscape architect would help you do.
Exactly. And as an urban designer, I have to look at economics, I have to look at the build forms, I have to look at the land forms, I have to look at sociology, everything together. I can't be a specialist in all these things. I'm an all-rounder. So my job is to create a team of specialists together, let them fight, let them work, let them collaborate, and lead them to the bigger goal. That's why we should lead. Simple.
I'd just like to add one point to what Milind said. Actually, this is again something what you said is something I hear very often, that why don't you go to implementation stage? And of course, an urban designer can go to an implementation stage, but when he goes to an implementation stage, it's like an architect. He's not acting like an urban designer. So an urban designer's actual role is to put forth a framework for the public realm. It's not to design the public realm. We have to understand this. There's a very clear differentiation. So, and it goes beyond ownership. For example, an urban designer will look at multiple ownerships, multiple kinds of spaces, whether it's a park or a housing project or a private land or public land or an SPP. So we have to look at the bigger picture and get the framework in place. And then there may be multiple people. There would be a landscape architect who will see how this framework can be implemented in detail at the park or an urban connector scale. A housing design, jo architect housing bana raha hai, he will look at that piece of the framework from his housing lens. So it's not the urban designer's job actually to get into this. I hear this very often. तुमने implement क्या किया है? नहीं काम है हमारा. Architect implement करता है. He does the design, the detailed design. It's not the job of the urban designer.
I just had one thing to add to Milind actually, and the point that you made about overview and that that you guys should lead because you overview. Also, quite often there are guidelines which what you urban designers set. And I think one of the things that really misses very strongly is the guidelines for the environment, or rather there are no guidelines stated for the way forest should be done or the way planting should be done. So I think those guidelines should be as much implementation. I mean, they should be implemented with the same amount of rigor that you would give to an unbuilt. So just as built is important, the unbuilt environment is equally important. And another thing I would like to see is who decides the land use. So when you're deciding a land use for a particular land, I think it should be the landscape architects, and their understanding of the larger environment. That should allow you to decide what is appropriate for a particular land, for that matter.
Well, for land use, So your aspect, the landscape aspect, is one of the aspects. Without economics, nothing works. Nothing works. That's one thing we have learned everywhere.
So in a way, are you saying that the landscape architects are not equipped to look at economics or land economics? Is that
No, it's not their specialization.
No, moderator.
Being a very good moderator, don't forget that. No, I am not being biased here at all.
So-
No. What I'm trying to ask you is, do you think that the urban designers are more?
No, not
is
at
that
all.
what you're saying?
No, I'm saying economic planners are the best ones who decide.
So do you think that the economic
policies.
planners should be the leads?
No.
Not really. So this is where we
I'll-
now go into the project specifics. Are we designing a new town? It has to be led by economic planners, town planners, infrastructure planners, and then down the line. Urban designers, the design comes at a design level, which is not the city level. It is to a planned level. So somewhere we have to look at those levels and where we can come in. Urban design, architectural design, landscape
So are you
design.
saying a green? Okay, so let me put it very simply. You're saying a greenfield project is a project where the economic planner might be the lead. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. Now, even if you look at the new policies of incentive programs for rebuilding cities, which is a brownfield project, happens through economic development incentives only. The TDR policies or the economic EWS policies, they come from planning perspective, how they want to reinvent cities. In Maharashtra now we have a UDCPR, which is Unified DCR, which looks at re-densifying cities and not letting the outskirts being randomly developed. So this is where again the planning principles or planning policies come in. Design comes later, much later.
I would have.
Chittiz, 1 minute, I think.
Yeah,
Gupta
absolutely.
wants to. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to catch a flight, and I'm like so excited to see this discussion happening. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I have been working with Romi for so many years. She's like a guru urban designer. I have a transport planner guru, Sandeep Gandhi. and we are landscape. I am a landscape architect. My husband is an architect. So we have been gaining a lot of knowledge from different agencies and then doing the public realm projects, that you guys are talking about, and the amount of detailing that is required by the landscape architects, that comes in finally. Now, what your point about urban design typology of project, we have worked with UTPEC on the Karkarduma urban design project, which was a planning project which went to a particular stage and then it was given out to the architects. So that was a project by itself, a planning project. And then the smaller part. So now maybe that bigger project was to be led by urban designers. But the sub parts, that had to be maybe led by landscape architects. Now, an example of how a planning project may fail is happened in the MMI projects that we had done in Delhi, in which the infrastructure was planned for, but when it was implemented, the metro stations were implemented in terms of the MMI, that zing did not come, the public realm did not happen. We did the Chhatarpur full on, so that happened. So that is why the landscape architect has, when you're doing the public realm project, landscape architecture is superbly important. So this was like, I felt that I will give a little bite and then go, sorry.
Thank you, Sujata. Yeah.
Sorry, so Milind, so what I was trying to say, yes, infrastructure planning is very important, no doubts about it. Yes, the understanding of land use is very important, no doubts about it. Just like urban designers are taught about this, landscape architects are also taught about the similar aspects, right? But what does the land use not see is where a landscape architect or an ecologist or somebody in those frameworks would like to come up and play with, right? So, which is what is also important for those kind of projects. It's the intangible part that is there, which needs to also be brought on paper. So, which is where the landscape architect as a lead will have a kind of sensibility to bring in, yes, ecologists are important, so they will bring in those people. Hydrologists are important, yes, they will. Infrastructural designers are important, yes. But then there are resources which can be planned in a very different manner. A road network cutting through Aravali is maybe the fastest, but is not the right thing. Correct? And NGOs should not be telling us doing that, right? So an NGO coming up and saying that this is not the right thing for us to understand. As professionals, we also understand that this is not the right thing. How can an infrastructure planner say that just going straight, because this is a highway, so the shortest route is a carbon negative route, is not the right thing? There could be so many other things in the path of that road, right? So landscape architects would be able to see those kind of natural resources present and will be able to plan for it. Yes, exactly, there will be an infrastructure planner who will plan for it, but those guidelines can then be set by a landscape architect, and then the other people can take up those things and then push this along, and then they become part of the team.
Sorry.
To add, okay, to add to this, the problem I'll tell you is, as per my understanding, after independence, what we have done is we have looked at built only for the solutions that we were looking for. We always looked at built environment for our solutions, whereas we should have looked at open spaces and to guide and determine the development of our cities when we were trying to build new cities at that time. So that's the main issue, that we have failed to recognize the power of open spaces and what they can do to help us guide the developments further. And that's the reason I think we are all debating on who should.
Actually, I'm again unfortunately speaking on your side, but at the planning stage, the point that you made that the landscape ecology has to be seen first, completely agreed, because not just in Delhi, but all over the country, I see local area plans and stuff being done where just a drain is going and they have just done yellow over it. There's not even, a notional blue or green line. It's extremely disturbing, but this is happening all over the country. So I think landscape architects need to become more aggressive about being heard. And one more thing.
Should not be wimps, right?
Yeah, and I didn't say that. And one more thing, that one way to do that may be to not pitch the ecology and environmental argument as being anti-development. We get sidelined because we appear to be anti-development. I don't think any of us is anti-development. So the thing that you said about the road cutting through or the metro cutting through. Now, if we are just aggressive about quantifying the value, this is something that we are discussing in the EI thing, because, in the government, every infrastructure project, it all comes down to finance. Somebody is passing the finance file. And if I can tell you how those trees and ridge can be saved, you can do an underground road, which is done all over the world to save forests, to save ecologies. The cost of that road is going to be, maybe 4 to 5 to 10 times more than the overground road. But in our country, there is no system of quantifying and financially quantifying through, there's no policy which gives economic value to landscape ecology.
The
And
cost of a tree.
Just one second. I know that. We all know. But the thing is that needs to find its way into legislation. And so, as a government officer, when I am putting up the file for approval, and if I want to say that do the road underground, they'll say, are you crazy? You're going to spend 10 times more public money. The only way I can defend that is if I have legislation saying that this ecology is worth this much in terms of whatever financial value. And then you can win the argument, because as Milind said, it all comes down to money.
So in fact, just to add to your point, the place where we are sitting today is the wetland of Mithi River, where Mumbai floods every year and loses out on I don't know how many crores of rupees per day, and we are still not able to. Am I audible now? Yeah. So I was just adding to Rumi's point that the exact place where we are sitting right now, the BKC, is the wetland of Mumbai's Mithi River, where the cost of development against the cost of how much we lose out every year per rainy day is never kind of understood. And we are still going further and choking our first one of the very few urban forests also under the guise of development. So I think somewhere what you're rightly pointing out is very true, that this needs to be put into the right place, that if you're doing something like this as development, what is the cost of that development? And then what the point you raised very well, that when we're talking about the cost of development of a project or the economics of a project, I think if we start adding these values, the tables will turn completely. Right? So yeah. Sure.
Just to add two different points. One is to Maithily's point about what we have done post-independence, and what we are talking about, understanding each other's professions. So we are talking about landscape architects and urban designers. We briefly talked about architecture, where she said that, we should integrate urban design from day one. We forget engineers. I think engineers, but we can't. They are the pardada, then the dadaji is architects, and then pitaji is maybe landscape architects. Exactly. So engineers needs to be sensitized that not everything is about efficiency, cost efficiency, design efficiency. It is also about the big picture of aesthetics and environment, which is not in their curriculum anywhere. And this is where we talk about all these things, but then they don't. And ultimately, those who are sitting in the lead chair, passing these finances, budgets, being engineers, I have nothing against them, except that they don't pass our projects the way we want. They look at the X by Y values, and that's where the decisions are made. Whereas now we were working on railway station designs. I was a design consultant. She was part of the client. And we had this budget all the time. And whenever we put up the projects, they would come back saying, these numbers are high, slash it down. cut the budget half. तो स्टेशन को हाफ तो काट नहीं सकते ना. But then we had to now remove open spaces and then some bridges and this, that. So just the basic skeletons left over. This is what happens when all professions working in this field are not having sensitiveness to each other. Talking about your topic about what we did post-independence, India has been focusing only on survival for many decades. रोटी कपड़ा मकान. तो रोटी कपड़े के लिए वर्क चाहिए, वर्क के लिए फैक्ट्री चाहिए, मकान के लिए घर चाहिए. So built environment. Our communities have been only surviving. Now in last 2 decades we are living, I would say, where the basics are more or less taken care of, but we are still aspiring for more. We are not yet thriving. Our country is not yet thriving where we can value design, value quality of life, which happens in the West or other countries where design is valued. I'm pretty sure everyone here who is an architectural design, landscape design is cribbing for money. Client paisa nahi deta. Why? Because they don't value your design inputs, what you're saving. So this is where our country is yet to see. I think it will take maybe 2 to 3 decades where urban design will become the core profession. Landscape design in EWS schemes will become a core requirement. Today it is only in the elite projects. Literally in the elite projects. I'm pretty sure you are designing great podium gardens and terrace gardens, but in where? The most expensive colonies, not in public projects. So this is where these two professions, landscape architecture and urban design, are yet to mature. Forget leading the projects. We are yet to mature as a profession and prove our value to our society. Once that happens, then we may debate, who leads.
No, I'd like to add to that. In just 2 minutes, I just want to add to that. See, what happens is, I think like this BKC's site as a convention center, as the decision has been made by neither a landscape architect, nor an architect, nor a urban designer. So I think the position of influence is something that we don't have, and engineers seem to have. I mean, the infrastructure engineers. I mean, engineers are there as advisors in almost every damn panel, whether it's lakes, whether it's riverfront. Chief Minister advisory panel is got some highway engineer. I'm sorry. So I'm not cribbing about that. I'm saying that we have not positioned ourselves yet. And I know everybody aspires to sort of speak about what you passionately feel is the way the city has to be shaped. But we don't have that we don't have the ear of the people who are taking the decisions. And that is leadership actually. And that leadership actually has to come from not between the two of us. I think that leadership of actually going there and talking to the people who eventually are taking decisions based on God knows what, without an awareness. I mean, maybe they are not really aware, or maybe they have certain priorities. But I think there could be a dialogue and discussion, and that has to come from a way that you can position yourself that you're heard. Right? I think that is leadership, and that leadership is what is lacking right now.
Are we almost reaching to co-parenting about taking care of the child? It's scary. We were supposed to be on the opposite ends of the spectrum. It's almost like let us co-parent and raise the child well. Right now, as a couple, we do not have that much, influence. Yeah. As a couple, we do not have that much influence. So let us try and get more influence.
So we marry the professions. We say urban landscape designers. Go to the government panel.
Yeah. So we are at the fag end of this so-called debate, which I suddenly, it's झगड़े से शुरू और प्यार हो गया वाला scenario. So I know. See, it's almost like वो first year में झगड़ा कर रहे थे, final year तक प्यार हो गया. अभी तो actual life शुरू हो रहा है. So before we I asked both the teams to give their closing remarks. open the forum to the audience. If anybody wants to say anything, add anything. There was somebody who was saying that the infrastructure consultant should be leading. See, everybody is agreeing to you now. Huh? So if anybody wants to add anything, say anything, it's an open forum now. Or questions. कि अभी तो प्यार हो गया, आगे क्या? वही situation चालू है. So yeah, sure.
So, hello. Yeah, jokes aside, like, so in झगड़ा नहीं हुआ, प्यार हुआ. That's because landscape. Milind को जो concern था कि मैं आपके घर आया हूँ landscape pavilion में, तो it's not going to be a fair forum, but it is because landscape वालों को वही they know how to
they
make
collaborate
friends.
and
Collaborate
make
and
friends.
make friends. That is it. But the question that I kind of the point that I want to ask all of you is that this question has arisen, and it is we can talk about it and forget about it. Fine. Past after this discussion is over. Do you think that in reality at the education level these two professions need to merge? Do we need to have a landscape architect also knowing about economics and architecture? How difficult is it? And why don't urban designers know more about trees? And I want to mention this, that it looks like a minor thing कि पेड़ लगाना तो बस वो लोग पेड़ लगाना है. But what I found the problem sometimes in working with architects and urban designers, एक पेड़ को कितना जगह चाहिए ये तो आपको नहीं मालूम है. तो जगह नहीं मालूम है तो क्या डिज़ाइन करोगे? और वो जगह छोड़ोगे नहीं तो हम कहाँ पेड़ लगाएंगे? तो फिर क्वेश्चन ये है कि पेड़ लगाना है, कैसा लगाना है, कहाँ लगाना है, ये भी नॉलेज अगर बने, दैट मीन्स अर्बन डिज़ाइन का जो प्रोफेशन डिसॉल्व होकर लैंडस्केप डिज़ाइन में ही आ जाए, तो व्हाट वुड यू से?
I think Shraddha also has something to say.
Just something totally very on a lighter tone. Like what Romi said, actually, I started thinking in that line. Maybe आज जाके we started to debate and then we actually agreed. This point आते नहीं थे. If we would have also thought of in education, thinking of urban designer, it's a reverse way. Like let's sensitize the first year students with urban design in a very simple way at landscape, because they have done biology, they have done life science in the schools, it's a continuation of that, and this get them sensitized in terms of the basics in the very simple ways of understanding landscape, urban design, infra, because they're coming from learning physics. So it's like maybe then they mature to architects. So maybe one can think of the reverse way of training their minds better.
This is almost like co-parenting. अभी वो co-parenting कैसे करे, बच्चे को क्या-क्या सिखाए? Next step.
So, can I come in?
Yeah.
So, I have an example. I am landscape architect, and in Ayojan School of Architecture in Jaipur, there is a course of Masters in Urban Design, still trying to mature. And in the Rajasthan University curriculum, they have a subject called site planning. So, we follow their guidelines, but being a landscape architect, with many discussions, we added a layer, or we are defining that differently in a way. Like we as a landscape architect, we study the layers designed with nature, all the hydrology and soils and ecology. So in site planning, we teach that. So we are sensitizing urban designers at a base level, that be sensitive, try to respect the natural resources, and then go ahead with your other points.
Lovely. Shraddha wanted to say something. Shraddha, and then and with that we'll.
Hi. In this discussion, I just wanted to raise two issues, which I think.
Shraddha, can you hold the mic?
I just wanted to raise two issues, which I think maybe you can give us your thoughts on. Who is the custodian of the land that we build our cities on? I'm not talking about urban designers or landscape architects. In my opinion, Mother Nature is the custodian of that land, as she has proven to us in the past 10 years. She decides what comes where, and I think irrespective of how many economists or planners or infrastructure developers, she has the final call. So I think landscape architects are maybe trained to integrate with Mother Nature better. And because of that, I'm not going to say that they should take the lead, but who decides what trade-offs are to be done and what kind of trade-offs have to be done? So human beings have always been very, very confident that they can, master Mother Nature. Leonardo at Versailles. So there are different perspectives, but I think as we know more and more about the planet, we need to understand how to integrate with each other better. And I think, I think Romi said, different aspects of city planning or project or architecture needs to be led at different points by different professions. And maybe we are right now at an advantage because we know more about ecology, but as Madhup and other people also pointed out, these subjects need to be caught at the school level. Right now, environmental awareness is huge, but I think design thinking, what is human impact on the planet, also needs to be sort of put into the curriculum.
Thank you. I think we'll just take a last comment and.
I enjoyed this debate, but what I wanted to just take an overlook about it is we all are into a profession where we are designing, we are dealing with built unbuilt spaces. We are actually, there was a person who used to say, अच्छा ये land है, अभी आप लोग आओगे तो अब इसको बिगाड़ दोगे ना. Any profession, AEC industry, that is what we do. That is what the general perception is. Nature hai, acha hai, but you all will come in and isko bigaad doge. So I think that impression that when a development happens, the nature gets destroyed or altered or, going down, we have to overcome that general perception of people. And secondly, what I would like to say is, there is a character of place that we should build. We always go to a place for tourism or what we admire. We always like that the general, whatever the environment or the place is offering, it can be built, unbuilt, a feeling when we go there. And we always take pictures, not necessarily of buildings, maybe of building and landscape and the overall nature that is happening over there. So our focus should be how are we creating the character of that place through built and unbuilt things. So instead of focusing on only unbuilt or only built or only engineering, we should just zoom out and see what that place character we want to first have, discuss among ourselves as profession and then work towards it. So I think if we take up that approach, we will come up with better design spaces and we'll come up with places where people would like to visit and not just development, because when I get visitors in Mumbai and they ask me, take me to places where I can say I have been to Mumbai, and I don't know where to take them. I don't know really, except for some places which was old Mumbai, I don't know where to take them. There is no place which defines the beauty of the city or the character of this city. So let's create some spaces where I can take my visitors to. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Rishikesh, I'll request you to take over for closing remarks.
Now, please give a big round of applause for all moderators and participants. So before we end today's session, we have one special speaker who is interested in summarizing the entire debate. And he has specially requested me that you give me a slot so that I can speak my heart out. And I'm glad to welcome partner of iDac and young and dynamic Thakoor.
Good evening. First of all, thank you so much for this brilliant session. So a great round of applause to every one of you. Who should lead the project? Firstly, I don't think that should be up for debate in my perspective. Before, when we started iDac in 2018 and 2019, sorry, and I met Rishikesh sir, is when I was introduced to landscape architecture, I'll be honest. And we did not know that that existed. So I'm being honest and upfront. The whole purpose of iDac is to collaborate and get everyone under one roof so that whenever any construction happens across the nation, it is in a uniform pattern. The reason why Mumbai is the way it is right now because of lack of collaborative efforts. And I'm going to close it this way. I hope have everyone seen Marvel movies, right? So the Avengers makes a lot of money compared to one Iron Man. So, and in Avengers, I think we have, all of them are heroes. So if we focus on defeating Thanos, we'll definitely win the game and not having one single like Salman Khan. So thank you so much.